Okay, so the Los Angeles Chargers. All I have to say is those three words, and instantly, nothing but chokes and collapses probably come to mind. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself, why is that? Why has this entire Chargers franchise seemingly just been forged in the fires of misery and sorrow? And boy, do I have an answer for you, but it is going to take this entire video to really conceptualize. So let's not waste any more time and get right into how the Los Angeles Chargers became the most unrespected, laughable, and downright cursed franchise in maybe the entire NFL. Alright, well, to find the undying energy source of endless pain for the Chargers, we gotta go back to when the team was created. So, I guess meet this guy, the original owner of the Chargers, Baron Hilton, who also owned some hotels, but more importantly, was a founding father of the NFL's contender league, the AFL. And once the Chargers were founded in 1959 and were named after a credit card company, the at the time Los Angeles Chargers would begin to compete in the AFL. And you know, for a startup organization, I don't think this team's coaching staff's notoriety will ever be topped, with the Chargers' first ever head coach being the great-great-grandfather of the modern passing offense in Sid Gilman, and just because they picked up two dudes to help Sid by the name of Al Davis and Chuck Noll, both of which would casually go on to win a combined 7 Super Bowls. But, you know, not on the Chargers, of course. But a coaching staff oozing of potential wasn't all they had either, as they also brought in some talent, with the most notable player being tight end Dave Kocerek, quarterback Jack Kemp, who will be more important in a minute, and in the most 1960s football move ever, the Chargers' best running back on the team was a man who was working in the mailroom of Hilton's credit card company, and just so happened to try his luck at tryouts one day in Paul Lowe. And with the squad now brought together, the Chargers started to win a lot, racking up a combined 22-6 record through 2 years, but ended up losing in the AFL Championship in both seasons to the exact same team in the Houston Oilers. Yeah, it literally didn't even take a full year, and the Chargers not only already changed cities, moving to San Diego, leaving LA behind, but they have already officially been molded in heartbreak. And to make the hole even deeper, in 1962, their season was derailed mostly due to injuries to both Paul Lowe and Jack Kemp, who ended up getting cut by the Chargers in a shocking move, and then he was claimed off waivers by the Buffalo Bills for a grand total of $100. $100 US. This human being services cost the same amount as a printer nowadays. Anyways, the Chargers sucked in 1962 is all you gotta know, but they added 2.5 cornerstones to their wall in progress during this time in a former NFL champion with the Lions in quarterback Tobin Rote, and most importantly, Kansas quarterback John Hadle and Arkansas wide receiver Lance Allworth, who they acquired the draft rights to from the Raiders. So going into 1963, Sid Gilman was getting impatient. The man had already been a massive innovator to the league, most famously helping to popularize the study of film, but now the old man might have gotten a little too lost in the sauce, forcing the entire Chargers team to hold their training camp on a desert ranch in the middle of nowhere, hoping that no distractions means there's only football to focus on. Except, although all of that was nice in theory, this ranch turned out to just be a depraved experimentation area, and Sid Gilman was the alchemist, with his first modification to his players being to add weightlifting into their daily routine on top of their 2 multiple-hour practices a day. I mean, that is just evil. No regular human being can go through that schedule day in and day out while sleeping on a haystack at night, and yeah, that's true. No normal human being can do that, but maybe if you throw in a little bit of pills, things can change. Because during training camp, the Chargers introduced their new strength coach, Alvin Roy, who did the basic trainer stuff, introducing a meal plan where everyone had to eat 3 meals a day at least, get more protein in their diet, and take one mysterious pill with every single meal they ate. The pills that were prescribed to the Chargers players, and especially the O-line, was called Dianabol, a type of steroid that was legal at the time entirely because of its lack of exposure, basically, but after damn near every single Chargers player was threatened with a fine larger than their per-game salary if they didn't take the pill, Sid's wicked scheme came to fruition, and all juiced up and ready to go, the Chargers rolled into the 1963 season and absolutely dominated. can you believe it? The Chargers did it. All it took was some steroids and a crusty-ass ranch, and the Los Angeles Chargers were easily able to go on autopilot mode during the regular season and win the AFL Championship against the Patriots, dropping a 50-burger on their heads. LA was on top of the AFL world, and believe it or not, this was the peak of the Chargers' existence. Never once in their entire 50 years and counting of this franchise's miserable existence have they ever reached a high quite like this one in 1963. And boy, do we have a long fall ahead of us. But in the current timeline, the players began to question if, maybe these pills had some side effects that came with it. And despite the mad scientist's best efforts of gaslighting his players, saying that, what do doctors know about football, am I right? I mean, they're all soft pussies. They can't prove that your testicles will shrink or something, but it was all in vain, because eventually the Chargers removed their mandatory policy on the drug, and the majority of the players went back to their normal versions of themselves. But the guys who never actually used the steroids in the first place continued to not even trip up for a second, with Lance Allworth and John Hadel, some of the alleged clean ones, continuing to light the still very young AFL on fire, leading the Chargers to another AFL championship game. But despite another good year, the Buffalo Bills were their opponent in the championship, where now led by the brother MFC wireless inkjet printer and Jack Kemp, they swiftly handled the Chargers in the big game 20-7 to send Sid and the crew back to the drawing board. Which takes us to the 1965 Chargers season, where this might have been the most important season in Chargers history, and just maybe we'll be able to pinpoint the exact moment where the Chargers organization became cursed. To start things out, the 65 campaign went perfectly according to plan like normal, with Hadel, Paul Lowe, and Allworth, along with a strong defense, being enough to carry them throughout the regular season to reach the AFL Championship game again, where, once more, the Chargers would face off against the Buffalo Bills, coached by Lou Saban, no relation to the other one, and quarterbacked by Jack Kemp, and also had a certain linebacker on the roster by the name of Marty Schottenheimer, and much later on, you'll see why I'm mentioning him now. But even with the result of last year's big game, the Chargers still came into this battle as a touchdown favorite, mostly in part due to their matchups earlier this season with the Bills, which included both a 20-20 tie as well as a 34-3 mutilation of Buffalo. So it seemed like LA had a good shot in this game at least, but listen closely, because before the 1965 AFL Championship game, Sid Gilman, the coach of the Chargers, committed the #1 cardinal sin of football, saying in an interview, there is no way we can lose this game on Sunday. No shot. We're going to win this game because Jack Kemp has the maturity of a 10-year-old girl. Well, okay. Surely this can't go wrong. Besides the fact that that was probably the most disrespectful and flat-out wrong thing Sid could have said about the MVP of the NFL in Jack, and on top of lighting another match under Kemp, who was already fueled by pure rage, it seems like, unlike a certain future quarterback of the Jets, Gilman didn't double down and make a deal with the devil. Instead, he chose to let his team go out there and do the walking for his talking. So, okay, the bold move there, and with that, the game was underway, and it was already over. Fuck me, Chargers. 0 points. 0. Arguably the best franchise in the AFL's history up to this point, became to this day the only team ever shut out in an AFL championship game. And the game was also just ugly. The Chargers couldn't do anything with Saban's game plan revolving around double-teaming Allworth on virtually every play, and just feast your eyes on this punt return by the Bills. I mean, what an effort by this dude. He really left it all out there on the line for the $50 he made during the game. So, this historical landmark of embarrassment at the hands of Jack Kemp once more became the beginning of a comical drought, as although they continued to log only winning seasons under Gilman from 1966 to 71, he had 0 playoff appearances to show for it, and after a small break from coaching due to a health concern, in 1971, Sid Gilman officially resigned as head coach of the San Diego Chargers, officially ending an underwhelming era, but at the same time, in a sad twist of fate, the franchise's most successful one to this very day. During this same stretch of time, the Chargers defense regressed into a unit with the strength of a passing tumbleweed. No more steroids. And they also watched as their big three of John Hadl and Paul Lowe's careers came to an end with the Chargers, and Lance Allworth was able to escape his abuser and win a Super Bowl with the Dallas Cowboys. And if that didn't give it away already, the biggest change during this time period was the AFL and NFL merger, where starting in the 1970 season, the Chargers would be playing with the rest of the big boys in the National Football League. So, back to the current timeline. The year is 1973, and the San Diego Chargers were sick and tired of being an afterthought and did all they could to overhaul the roster in one offseason, adding Hall of Famers Johnny Unitas and John Mackey onto the 35-year-old Hall of Famer Deacon Jones already on the roster. And if that wasn't enough firepower, they used their first-round pick in 1973 on the Nebraska wide receiver slash running back slash special teams guy and Heisman Trophy winner Johnny Rodgers to complete a terrifying roster. This was definitely a strategy for trying to win games, and it probably would have worked if all those legends weren't in their late 30s, and if Johnny Rodgers didn't decide to just go play in Canada instead. And after some drug issues and another coach getting thrown through the meat grinder, the Chargers turned out their second lowest win total season in franchise history to this day. You would think that, well, what was the point of even mentioning this season, right? The Chargers didn't do anything, but they did do one thing right, and to give credit where credit's due, it seems to be the only thing that this franchise can still do relatively well to this day, and that's drafting a franchise quarterback. So after whiffing on their first round pick, the Chargers decided to use their third round selection on Oregon quarterback Daniel Fouts, and hoped that the primordial Unitas would be a wise master to his young apprentice. But by week 4, Unitas was just so clearly cooked. The stats he was dropping gave the Chargers no choice. They had to let their project go out there and just die, and Unitas would never start another game again, with Dan Fouts finishing out the season. And for the next 5 years, Fouts would consistently be a solid quarterback, but failed to get the Chargers to the playoffs without enough weapons around him, and more importantly, a head coach that was able to unleash his full potential. But eventually, that guy came. This is Air Coryell, a very respected coach in the NFL at the time as well as at the college level, where he coached San Diego State previously as well as the Cardinals. And after Chargers coach Tommy Prothro became victim to the famous Holy Roller, he just couldn't take it anymore. And through the first 4 games of the 1978 season, he resigned from his position, and the Chargers, seeing an opportunity to change their future, immediately made Air Coryell their next head coach. And immediately, Coryell was thrown in to coach the Chargers against a very good Patriots team in Week 5, where, unfortunately, the Chargers would implement a blueprint to their game script that they still follow almost religiously to this very day. I mean, take a wild guess. Just take a shot in the dark at what you think happened during this game, and chances are your guess is probably right, because the Chargers jumped out to a big lead and had control of the game, only for the team to just shut down all power sources near the end and lost to New England off of a last-second quarterback scramble 28-23. But let's not focus on the collapses or a potential villain introduction for just a minute, and focus on the positives, because once Dan Fouts and receivers Charlie Joyner and John Jefferson got a hang of the new Air Coryell offense, both Fouts and Jefferson's stats ballooned up, with Joyner's moment of triumph coming soon, as the Chargers, led by their intense offensive genius, won 7 of their last 8 games, scoring upwards of 26.5 points per game. And when I said Coryell was an offensive genius, he was still so much more than that. Don was a man who actually stole a lot of knowledge from the Chargers' previous head coach in Sid Gilman, and because he used to coach San Diego State, he would often have his team watch Chargers practices to better understand their passing system. But once he got to the Chargers, he looked around and saw the pieces at his disposal and implemented a revolutionary offensive scheme known as Air Coryell. And put simply, this scheme aimed to completely go against the run-heavy norm at the time and run 4 receiver sets on damn near every play and always have at least one guy go out for a deep route. So now, going into 1979, the Chargers look primed to be unleashed on the NFL this season, tearing down anyone who dared to step in their way. And if the offense still needed more gunpowder, they drafted future Hall of Fame tight end Kellen Winslow in the 1979 draft, a man who would casually go on to reinvent the tight end position forever. So although the Chargers are the Chargers, not even some prehistoric curse would be enough to stop this team from going on a full-out rampage this season.
Now he goes for the mark himself, and looking for 6. Jefferson!
This had to be the year. Right off the bat, the Chargers were tied with Pittsburgh for the best record in the NFL, winning 12 games. Both Charlie Joyner and John Jefferson had 1,000-yard seasons, just continuing to feast off of the extra targets. And Dan Fouts, Daniel just broke everything. He wasn't on steroids, but I mean, he might have been on something else. I don't know, but his stats this season looked like he had just gotten dropped in 1979 straight out of a time machine, leading the league in almost every single passing category. And if having the most dangerous offense in football wasn't enough, these new-look Chargers also had a sturdy-ass defense, led by All-Pro defensive tackle Gary Johnson and Hall of Fame defensive end Fred Dean, among others, to lead the NFL's second-ranked defense that year. So, you get it now? This Chargers team was immortal, and an AFC championship matchup between the NFL's current dynasty in Pittsburgh and the future one in San Diego seemed all but inevitable. All that stood in the way for the Chargers was a divisional round matchup with the Houston Oilers. The Houston Oilers.
They're back!
Yep, they are back. It's been a while, but they've returned. The team that handed the Chargers their first ever disappointment way back in the day stood in their way once more. But I honestly don't think the Chargers could have been more favored unless someone assassinated Houston's head coach, because the Oilers were set to be without their quarterback Dan Pastorini, their previous Pro Bowl receiver Ken Burrow, and the entire offense itself for Houston, with the human ball of pain in the 5'11", 232-pound running back Earl Campbell, the MVP of the NFL this year, being ruled out for this game as well. And on top of all of that, the Oilers' defense wasn't even particularly good, as they allowed the 15th most passing yards in the NFL this year. The only thing Houston had going for them was their head coach by the name of Bum Phillips, who, unfortunately for the Chargers, had worked as the defensive coordinator way back in the day when Sid Gilman was running the show. So, although it definitely was far from a one-to-one comparison, maybe for one singular game, Bum was the guy to shut down the unstoppable Air Coryell offense. Or maybe not, because this is where things get murky. See, the offensive coordinator at the time for the Chargers was Joe Gibbs. You might have heard of him, I don't know, he won a few Super Bowls, but whatever, that's not the point. Bottom of the line is, he was the guy calling plays for the Chargers. And to visually illustrate this through my drawing skills here, Gibbs calls the plays, tells the assistant head coach and Don Coryell, who then makes the final signal to Dan Fouts on the field through a form of hand signals. Now, it is alleged that the Houston Oilers were able to decipher this code the Chargers had made up during the season, and supposedly set up the goofiest system I've ever seen to take down San Diego, where, once again, I'll whip out the paintbrush here, when the Chargers were on offense, Wade Phillips, the D-line coach for the Oilers, would use binoculars from his press box to spy on Coryell to see what hand signal he used. Then he would call the Oilers defensive coordinator, tell him what hand signal they used, and he had already cracked the code and knew what each signal meant. So then that guy would give those hand signals to the Oilers linebackers, who would then know exactly what play the Chargers were going to run. I'm sorry for that being so confusing, but that's the best way I could put it. And the only reason I'm mildly entertaining this idea is when this game began, with everything stacked up against the Oilers, they bullied San Diego, as Dan Fouts logged one of the worst games a quarterback has ever had in the postseason, throwing 5 interceptions and 0 touchdowns. And even more embarrassingly, 4 of those picks went to the exact same guy, a random-ass rookie by the name of Vernon Perry, who is now a teacher, and the Chargers lost the game to the Gifford Nielsen-led Houston Oilers 17-14, and had to watch from their moldy-ass couches as the two teams that made the Super Bowl that year in the Steelers and Rams duked it out, both being teams that the Chargers had utterly dismembered earlier this same season. If that's not the most Chargers loss in the history of Chargers losses, I don't know what is. The only thing standing in their way of a probable Super Bowl win was a few handshakes or something, and a college professor who just turned out to be such an immovable object that Dan Fouts couldn't even figure out how to throw a forward pass anymore. I still just don't know what to say. That was a work of art. I'm impressed, but the Chargers had no choice but to run it back in 1980, and on paper, the case could be made that this team was even better than their 1979 roster, with Joyner and Jefferson both logging 1,000-yard seasons, but this time, the young Kellen Winslow also dropped a 1,000-yard campaign of his own, becoming the first trio in NFL history to accomplish this feat, and with the midseason trade for Pro Bowl running back Chuck Muncie, the Chargers offense did offensive stuff, as they once again locked up home field advantage through the playoffs, winning 11 games. And to begin the playoffs, once again, the Chargers went up against a team with an injured quarterback in Joe Ferguson's Buffalo Bills, except Ferguson chose to play through his injuries, which wasn't the move whatsoever, putting in a performance that rivaled Fouts' masterclass from last year. And even with that, the Chargers just barely escaped Buffalo after a late fourth quarter comeback orchestrated by Fouts and the offense. So now, here we are. The Chargers are so close to a Super Bowl appearance, and luckily for them, the team that had to travel to San Diego wasn't the Oilers, but instead, I guess, actually not so luckily, the Oakland Raiders, who barely had to travel at all, and came into this game fresh off of destroying Houston, as well as benefiting from the Browns chopping off their own pecker as per usual. Now, the Raiders didn't have Coryell's hand signals memorized, or at least I don't think they did, but they did have a ferocious defense led by All-Pros in Lester Hayes and Ted Hendricks, who would make their impacts felt early on, both forcing turnovers in the first half. And add on a third one by San Diego, and what you get is a 28-7 hole right off the bat in the second quarter to just take whatever fans they had out of the game right away. But remember, these are the Chargers, and rule number one for them is football isn't a sport, it's a comedy. So they didn't just give up yet, they actually fought back and then gave up at crucial moments. See, that's the key right there. That's the key to consistent misery, with John Jefferson dropping 2 massive touchdowns that could have changed the outcome of this game. And even at the end of it, when the Chargers battled back to bring the game to within 7 points, on 3rd and long, the Chargers went off sides. Well played, Chargers. Well done. And the Raiders then proceeded to pick up the first down and run the clock all the way down to 0. It's official. Time was now running out for the Chargers. With Fouts getting into his 30s, Charlie Joyner entering his age 34 season, as well as both John Jefferson, Fred Dean, and offensive coordinator Joe Gibbs leaving the Chargers during the 1981 offseason, San Diego maybe had one more good run in them, and one more opportunity to prove that the Air Coryell offense could win a Super Bowl. Now, this 1981 Chargers team was probably the weakest so far with Don Coryell coaching for a full season, but that doesn't mean that this team wasn't expected to make some noise down the road, as once again, they led the NFL in passing yards, and the Fouts, Winslow, and Joyner connection proved to once again be strong enough to drag a now very bad Chargers defense to another double-digit win season, subsequent division title, and first-round bye, which set the stage for one of the most legendary playoff games, if not the most legendary playoff game ever. The Epic in Miami didn't get its name from nothing, and guess what? The Chargers took a massive lead, 24-0 actually, on this 88-degree day, having everything go right for them, and then it didn't. Because the Dolphins ended up swapping quarterbacks to bring in Don Strock, who rallied the Dolphins back, leading them to tie the game. Okay, but although the Chargers' will to lose was strong, for this one game only, Kellen Winslow's soul was stronger, as the man was simply possessed on this day, logging 13 grabs for 166 yards and a touchdown, once again as a tight end. But while his entire team was doing everything in their power to lose this game, literally catching an interception and fumbling it back to the other team, I mean, how does that happen? Well, more on that later. After that situation, the Dolphins were set to kick a game-winning field goal, but Kellen Winslow just said, "Put me in, coach. We ain't losing." And the tight end blocked the game-winning field goal to give the Chargers a fighting chance in overtime. So you know the drill. The Chargers got the ball back and fed Winslow until he passed out, but they did end up getting a free chip shot opportunity and blew it. But the defense actually made a play, and once again, you cannot make this stuff up. When San Diego got the ball back, they immediately blew their opportunity and fumbled the ball right back to the Dolphins. I cannot stress this enough, but the Chargers simply couldn't have tried to lose this game more. But the Dolphins just didn't have enough talent to take advantage of that. And another blocked field goal later and Winslow getting dragged off the field again, the Chargers limped into another field goal attempt and finally ended the game for good, punching their ticket to the AFC Championship. But although they won, I mean, they just exhausted all of their resources and beyond more, as they had to go from a hot and humid 88-degree game a week ago to the coldest game in NFL history, traveling to Cincinnati to take on the Bengals in negative 9-degree Fahrenheit weather with a negative 59-degree Fahrenheit wind chill, all up against the MVP of the NFL, Ken Anderson, who wasn't injured this time. And what resulted was the effective funeral of the Don Coryell era in San Diego, as once again, the Chargers fell in the AFC Championship, one game short of the Super Bowl, with Dan Fouts struggling heavily as the Chargers got blown out 27-7. And over the next few seasons, this core would slowly deteriorate, with the 1982 season being a lockout year, pretty much the NFL equivalent to the NBA bubble season. I mean, Dan Fouts lost the MVP to a kicker, and the Chargers won 6 games during the regular season and got destroyed in the playoffs by the Dolphins anyways. And after 3 seasons from 1983 through 1985 without a single winning record, the Chargers knew what they had to do. And in 1986, when Coryell and the Chargers started out 1-7, he was a dead man walking and officially resigned, but was allegedly fired as head coach of the Chargers on October 30th, 1986. This officially ended an era, but, you know, maybe things could have gone differently if the Chargers had access to this video's sponsor, Surfshark. Now, I say that because Surfshark is a VPN that protects your data from others, and if it had existed back in the day, I'm sure the Chargers could have easily used Surfshark to ward off hackers and keep their private information secure. Surfshark VPN also allows you to virtually go anywhere in the world with just a few clicks, which can let you access websites and maybe TV shows that you wouldn't be able to see otherwise in your area. So, for example, if you wanted to watch a certain NFL game but your specific area is blocking it, all you gotta do is switch to another area on Surfshark and boom, problem solved. And not only that, but when you use Surfshark, you are actively stopping other potentially unwanted viewing of your data. And just like you guys, there's definitely some companies out there I don't want seeing my data. And if you're going to double down, you might as well add on even more security with the Surfshark alert system to protect your identity and receive real-time breach alerts if something has gone horribly wrong. And even with all of that, if you're somehow still on the fence, Surfshark offers a 30-day money-back guarantee no matter what. So to get started with Surfshark VPN, enter promo code TubFrog at checkout for an additional 3 free months of VPN use. Once again, that is promo code TubFrog for an additional 3 months of free VPN use to keep your data secure. So thank you to Surfshark for sponsoring this video, and with that, let's get back to the Chargers' misery. So with Coryell gone, this truly was the end, and after the 1987 season where the Chargers once again failed to make the playoffs, their big three was now gone, with Chargers fans watching as their childhood heroes in Dan Fouts, Charlie Joyner, and Kellen Winslow all retired without even a Super Bowl appearance. But they had a good regular season run at least, I guess, as San Diego led the NFL in passing yards all the way from 1979 through 1985, with the exception of 84 when Dan Marino existed, but Coryell had left his fingerprints all over the league now, with more teams deciding to lean on the pass more than they ever had before, with the biggest reason of that being Coryell himself. But you don't get franchise points for changing the game, unfortunately, and from 1987 through 91, the Chargers rotated from former offensive coordinator under Coryell turned coach Al Sanders to Dan Henning, resulting in almost zero success. And now, although there's pretty much nothing to report from this time skip of 1982 through 1991, there is one thing, one singular change that made sure the Chargers' traditions never died out, and that move was the transferring of ownership within the Chargers franchise when businessman Alex Spanos bought the team in 1984, putting the franchise in the grubby hands of the Spanos family, who also hired general manager Bobby Beathard in 1990. However, we ain't there yet. Don't worry, we'll get there eventually, but for now we gotta introduce some new characters over these years, with the new cornerstones of San Diego being on defense this time, with the offense now lagging behind as Junior Seau and Leslie O'Neal both anchored a feared Chargers defense in the 90s. And to help the offense maybe a little, the Chargers brought in Georgia Tech national championship winning head coach Bobby Ross, as well as quarterback Stan Humphries to attempt to be Dan Fouts' successor, and as is tradition to begin new eras in San Diego, their entire 1992 season showed that this stench all over the organization was here to stay for sure. First, the Chargers started off the year losing each of their first 4 games, capping off this horrible streak with a 0-27 dissection at the hands of their old ringleader in the Oilers. But whatever. Somehow, the Chargers just casually rebounded and won 11 out of their next 12 games and clinched a playoff berth, becoming still to this day the only team to ever start out a season going 0-4 and end up making the postseason. And although nobody expected a deep run from the Chargers, or even a playoff win to be honest, as they were matched up against the Marty Schottenheimer-led Chiefs in the first round, who beat the Chargers badly in Week 1 earlier, and also prior to the game were the last team to take down the Chargers in Week 10. But in a rainy weather game, it just wasn't the Chiefs' day whatsoever, as Marty's squad failed to score a single point all game long, and the Chargers didn't wake up until the third quarter either, and ended up getting the win 17-0 regardless. But like I said, nobody expected much from this Chargers team, and they walked towards their execution the next week, turning the shutout on themselves, this time getting ass blasted by the Dolphins 31-0. So the 1992 season was over, but it did prove 2 things. 1, Bobby Ross is this team's head coach going forward, and he is the guy. And also, somehow, it seems like this Chargers team had just about the bare minimum talent required to make some noise in the playoffs. And going into 1994, and as the season went on, that year, 1994 would be the one season where the Chargers broke the mold they'd set out for themselves, sort of. The 1994 Chargers, whose daily operations had now been extended into the hands of Dean Spanos, were good, but weren't that good. It's confusing, but this team was a squad that actually got lucky at the right moments and sort of just rode momentum and their great defense, still led by Seau and O'Neal, to success this season, as they started out the season blistering hot, going 6-0, but then they fell back down to earth a little bit, and from weeks 8 through 17, the Chargers finished with a 500-5-5 record and were able to take advantage of a weaker AFC West, getting the luxury of a first-round bye. Once again, this team didn't even have half a hair of the firepower that they once had. Their quarterback, Stan Humphries, was simply okay, and the offense ran through running back Natron Means, who logged a great season going for well over 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns. But when Dan Marino and the Dolphins took down Montana's Chiefs and came into the Chargers Stadium, they immediately became the favorites to win the game, rather than the team that had the bye in the first place. And once the game began, it looked like everyone was going to be right, with Dan Marino doing Dan Marino stuff, and he just Marino'd all over the field, doing near nothing wrong in the first half, taking a 21-6 lead going into the third quarter with these just inhuman stats, but that's what he does at this point. But, like I said, the Chargers must have just swapped places with another team this year, as the defense stepped up to the plate and destroyed everything, clamping Dan Marino and the Dolphins for the entire second half, holding them to 0 points, while the Chargers offense did, once again, the bare minimum to take a 22-21 lead with 24 seconds remaining. However, with Dan Marino on the other side of the field, God only knows what'll happen next, and of course he went right down the gridiron, deciding he knew how to play football again, to set up a makeable field goal to break the Chargers' hearts, and when it was up, oh, he missed it badly. Oh my God, the Chargers just won. A high snap and horrendous kick with seconds remaining sent the Chargers onto their third ever AFC Championship game where they would play against Neil O'Donnell and the Pittsburgh Steelers. This AFC Championship really didn't have any headlines going for it. I mean, these were the two best players on both teams' offenses. Running back Natron Means and tight end Eric Green. I bet like less than 2% of you out there actually know who these guys were before I told you, but I guess the game did have one headline, and that was Bobby Ross and the San Diego Chargers being massive underdogs, with the Steelers being favored by anywhere between 6 and 11 points. But guess what? It didn't play out that way at all, with the Steelers taking an early lead, only for the Chargers defense to turn on the Terminator setting, while the offense eventually retook the lead 17-13 late in the fourth quarter. So once again, same exact situation as the Miami game, where the Steelers went right down the field, but instead of a field goal, they needed a touchdown. And on 4th and goal on the 3-yard line, Pittsburgh seemed to be in prime position to end it all. O'Donnell dropped back, and the pass was broken up. Wow. Unbelievable. Out of every Chargers roster that had been the most talented in the entire league, out of all of their all-time great teams, this one, led by a few dudes on defense who were very good and a second-year running back, turned out to be the first Chargers team that made a Super Bowl appearance. All the credit in the world goes to head coach Bobby Ross, but the issue was the Chargers were celebrating too much, way too much, and honestly, they knew they weren't that good, and everyone else knew too, and people seemed to be happy enough that the Chargers even got this far, and Vegas promptly rewarded the Chargers with the biggest point spread in the history of the brown ball sport, with an 18.5 point difference between them and the San Francisco 49ers, their opponent in this Super Bowl. I mean, come on. I know the Chargers weren't exactly a dynasty or anything, but Jesus Christ, almost a 3-touchdown difference? That is way too massive of a gap. How can anyone even possibly bring... Yeah, well, I guess it was fun while it lasted, sort of. The Chargers got clobbered. From the beginning to the end, an absolute clobbering. This game felt like a perfectly bred Rottweiler playing with a stuffed animal for 60 minutes straight. I'm not even going to show any more highlights. It was that brutal. But looking back, this 1994 season was just so odd. And although the team stayed relatively the same over the next 2 seasons, they only mustered 1 wildcard appearance and an abrupt loss to the Colts. And then before the 1997 season, just like what happened with one of the men before in Air Coryell, Bobby Ross resigned from his position as head coach. And although it was once again alleged he was effectively fired after internal disputes between him and general manager Bobby Beathard just kept piling up one after the other, and things got a little too spicy. Regardless of whether moving on from the only head coach that had ever gotten the Chargers to a Super Bowl was the right call or not, the deed had already been done, and it was time for another Chargers rebuild. Yep. This is how it works, huh? The cycle is just inevitable. Hire a great coach, be pretty good in the regular season, disappoint everyone in the playoffs, fire the coach, and then suck for 5 years. And guess where we're at right now? Because from 1997 all the way through 2002, the Chargers were just awful, suffering through some of the worst quarterback play you'll ever see, especially from their second overall pick in 1998, a guy by the name of Ryan Leaf, and under head coach Mike Riley in 2000, the San Diego Chargers found the lowest point in the floor and somehow found a way to go a little deeper with a 1-15 record, their worst in franchise history. But that's the thing with hitting rock bottom, then hitting rock bottom, and then rock bottom again. That there's only one way to go but up. Right. So on January 28th of 2002, the Chargers brought in the enemy, Marty Schottenheimer, the former Bills linebacker in the 1960s, as well as the Chiefs and Browns' previous head coach, who at the time was best known for being able to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory better than maybe anyone at any craft ever. Seriously, and the thing is, a lot of his meltdowns weren't even his fault, so with a team as cursed as the Chargers were, it was definitely a bold move, but now with Marty here and another time skip happening, it's character reintroduction time, so meet the new stars of this Chargers team in their 2001 NFL draft duo of quarterback Drew Brees and LaDainian Tomlinson, a duo who I'm sure will dominate the league for the next decade or so, all put together by new general manager John Butler, who tragically passed away due to lymphoma and was eventually replaced with GM A.J. Smith. Other than those two notable players, Rodney Harrison and Donnie Edwards proved to be impactful defensive players, but still, the baby Chargers weren't ready to compete yet, and the Marty era in San Diego started off real rough, logging a 12-20 record in his first 2 seasons, but because they lost games very well, they ended up picking up some very important pieces for their future in the 2004 draft, getting a haul with Pro Bowlers in kicker Nate Kading, who's going to be more of a main character moving forward, center Nick Hardwick, and defensive end Sean Phillips. And most importantly, after a decade or so without having a true franchise quarterback after whiffing on Ryan Leaf, the Chargers executed a draft day trade to bring in North Carolina State quarterback Phillip Rivers into San Diego. And the quarterback they traded with the first overall pick to get Rivers was Eli Manning, who straight up refused to play for the Chargers because of the horrible things he had heard about their front office from Leaf's disastrous tenure there. So just so you know, things were all good in the Chargers front office as per usual. But wait a minute, didn't they already have Drew Brees on the roster? So why in the hell did they draft another quarterback? Well, if you've watched this video I did covering the tortured soul of Drew Brees, you would know that he was currently out of service and nursing himself back to health after a near career-ending injury, and even the smallest amount of uncertainty on whether Brees could ever develop into a Pro Bowl quarterback was enough for the Chargers to go after another guy. However, somehow, against all odds, Drew Brees came back stronger than anyone could have possibly imagined, and although it did take a threat of being benched by Marty to get there, Drew Brees, LaDainian Tomlinson, and an unknown second-year tight end by the name of Antonio Gates all made Pro Bowls, with LT and Gates making all-pro teams, with the Chargers doing their usual slow start, hot finish thing, winning 9 of their last 10 games to slam a 12-4 record on the rest of the AFC, their best record since 1979. Now, in reference to that team from 1979, Marty Ball, the system the Chargers used, named after their defensive coordinator Wade Phillips, of course, was almost as far away from the offensive philosophy the Chargers had been known for, where instead of airing it out, the running game, led by LaDainian Tomlinson, was the heartbeat of the offense, and many people thought changing the scheme would bring success to the Chargers, the likes of which fans haven't seen since the early 60s. So I mean, yeah, I guess in theory that would work, you know, if it's broke, fix it. And although it did work during the regular season, you know, Chargers won a lot of games, but when the Chargers got into their first playoff game under Marty Schottenheimer, immediately it was shown to the entire world that the San Diego Chargers were still the NFL's premier circus clowns. Chargers-Jets, 2004 wildcard. And I'm just going to take you straight into the action, where after a dude fell over for the Chargers and they scored a few points, in a wet and stormy game on their second possession in overtime, the Chargers rode LaDainian Tomlinson down the field to set up a 40-yard field goal attempt to straight up win the game. And the man who would attempt this kick would be their rookie kicker Nate Kading, the highest drafted kicker in the 2004 NFL Draft, who only found himself on the Chargers because of a draft pick acquired in the Eli Manning for Phillip Rivers swap trade thing. So when Nate walked out onto the field, the Chargers should have felt pretty confident, but I mean, look at Marty here. This is not the face of a man who thinks everything is going to go well for him, and after not exactly helping their young kicker get an easier kick with 3 plays adding up for 0 total yards, of course, with a good hold and a good snap, wide right. Not even close. The Jets then smelled the faintest drop of blood in the water and pounced, kicking a game-winning field goal to end Marty's first truly successful season with the Chargers. And unfortunately, the Chargers rode that misery into the 2005 season as well, starting off slow and then getting hot, and then dropping their last 2 games to divisional opponents to go 9-7 in Drew Brees' final season in San Diego to miss the playoffs. However, the Chargers once again just nailed their drafting during this era, with GM A.J. Smith proving early on at least that he's got a keen eye for talent, bringing in a rich haul of future All-Pro Sean Merriman and Pro Bowlers Vincent Jackson and Darren Sproles in the 2005 NFL Draft, and then in 2006, they picked up the sturdy Antonio Cromartie, all guys who will be here for a while. Well, okay, I guess it's time. Here we are in the Philip Rivers era, and more specifically, from 2006 through 2010, the Chargers, an organization that has already proven to be just masters of agony, they took their craft to an entirely nother level and turned in possibly the most 5 disappointing years in American sports. I know that sounds like a little bit of an attention-grabbing statement, but just hear me out. The 2006 Chargers are still to this day regarded as the best Chargers team in franchise history, but it wasn't always looking that way, as through Week 7, they sat at a 4-2 record, which was by no means bad at all, but after a monster Week 1 performance running for over 130 yards, from Weeks 2 through 7, LaDainian Tomlinson had slowed down in terms of pure rushing yards, and if the Chargers were going to become a truly special team, this guy had to get going. And of course, that exactly happened, with Philip Rivers being good, the defense also being great, but no one cared. The story of this Chargers team was LaDainian Tomlinson, and the greatest running back regular season in NFL history.
Tomlinson, off the left side, Tomlinson sidestep, hello, history books!
This team was not even a little bit fair. LaDainian Tomlinson set the record for most rushing touchdowns in a season, among other records, and he won the MVP in the process, with the Chargers defense being led by All-Pros and Pro Bowlers everywhere, and besides LT, the Chargers offense was also stacked, with 2 other All-Pros and the now Pro Bowl Philip Rivers. And this team was still led by their veteran head coach Marty Schottenheimer, who now entering a divisional round matchup at home versus the Patriots, was ready to prove that he could finally get it done when it mattered most. I guess a little content warning for you Chargers fans out there, but for me personally, I believe that Marty Schottenheimer was at least somewhat aware of his bad voodoo. I mean, seemingly at every possible situation, what could have gone wrong did. So, in order to stop a cataclysmic disaster from happening before this Patriots game, Marty... I still can't believe this happened. Marty went over to all of his DBs, presumably, and told them this.
Make sure now, when you get the interception at the end of the game that wins it, you just go down on the ground and the hell with all that running around, all right?
The hell with all that running around stuff. If only they listened. But we'll get there when we get there. And with the aforementioned Patriots led by Thomas and the number 2 ranked defense in the NFL, this wasn't going to be an easy task, but one the best team in the NFL record-wise should be able to accomplish. Instead, I had to whip out another one of these graphs, and a graph that shows every last thing that went wrong for the Chargers in this one game. And the first one here was a free dropped interception that would have set the Chargers up in great field position. Instead, what resulted was a New England punt and a Philip Rivers fumble, giving the Patriots 3 free points. Next, we gotta go a little bit forward and find the Chargers actually picking up a crucial turnover, except after they got that turnover, they immediately went 3 and out and did nothing with this opportunity. And on the other side of the field, when Tom Brady and the Patriots got a similar chance right before halftime hit, with just seconds left, the Patriots ran straight down the Chargers defense and got a dagger touchdown to bring the game to within 4. But the Chargers defense continued to just have a great game. Tom looked so out of it, and after another stop late in the third, the Chargers were set to have some solid field position until Eric Parker fumbled the punt and gave the ball right back to Brady and company, where things just kept spiraling out of control even more because San Diego actually stopped the Patriots with a great defensive play, even getting a strip sack. But that would have just been way too painless, and the Chargers corner Drayton Florence just lost his mind, and the 15-yard penalty gave the Patriots 3 more free points that they otherwise wouldn't have had if the Chargers weren't just the Chargers. So, at this point, Marty wasn't happy at all. This team needed a big play, and a massive drive leading to a LaDainian Tomlinson touchdown gave them that and more, as now the Chargers had all the momentum they needed to take down the evil empire. But we've now reached the climax. 4th and 5. The last stand for New England. Either pick this first down up or put the fate of this game into the hands of the MVP of the NFL. And on that fourth down, it happened.
And he goes in, he's intercepted for the third time, and the ball comes out.
Marty was right. He did some of that running around stuff and paid an unlawful price, with the Patriots scoring a touchdown and picking up the 2-point conversion to tie this game. In one singular play, Marlon McCree shifted the momentum straight to the Patriots. They had all the power they needed now, and the second to final dagger in the Chargers' throat came on a 3rd and 10 play with the game tied, where Patriots wide receiver Resh Caldwell picked up a 50-yard pass to set up 3 more free points. And unfortunately, those 3 points, as well as the other unnecessarily easy field goals New England racked up over the game, proved to be just enough, as finally Chargers kicker Nate Kading, big game Nate Kading, missed his 54-yard game-tying attempt the second it was up in the air, and that was a masterclass in what it's like to watch a Chargers football game, as the best team in Chargers franchise history went out in just their first playoff game. But wait, it gets worse, because although this team won 14 games, the offensive coordinator Cam Cameron was gone. Defensive coordinator Wade Phillips, gone. And the head coach of the Chargers, Marty Schottenheimer, was just straight up fired by Spanos because behind closed doors, apparently the beef between him and general manager AJ Smith because of alleged issues with his children got so steamy that the Chargers fired him after a 14-win season. With Marty banished to wallow in his own anguish, the Chargers hired former 49ers offensive coordinator Norv Turner to coach the team going forward. And in his first season as the coach in 2007, the season began and ended with disappointment, with San Diego going 1-3 to start the season, only to ride another league-leading rushing performance from LT to a playoff spot, and another AFC West title with an 11-5 record. And in the most Chargers way to ever make an AFC Championship game, they defeated the Vince Young Titans and then upset the 13-win Peyton Manning-led Colts in the divisional round. But the reason I'm skipping over this so casually is because by the time they got to the AFC Championship against the best team in NFL history in the 2007 Patriots, San Diego was injured and thrashed beyond repair, with Antonio Gates playing through a dislocated toe injury, LaDainian Tomlinson only being able to handle 2 carries on an MCL sprain, and Philip Gosh Diggity Darn Rivers played this game with a torn ACL. And even with all of that, the Chargers still had at least a long shot at winning this game, almost taking down the 07 Patriots. So the 2007 season felt like a missed opportunity for the Chargers because of factors outside of their control. And now going into 2008, Chargers fans just wanted to see their fully healthy team have another chill, dominant regular season, but in literally week 1, the Chargers made it clear that being a normal team just ain't in their DNA, after a last-second thriller with the Panthers, where of course, San Diego lost on the game's final play. And as the end of the season approached, the Chargers found themselves with a dangerous losing record of 4-8, coming off of a Week 13 loss to former Chargers running back Michael Turner, and now they were no longer in control of their destiny. You see, across the country, the Denver Broncos were in full control of the AFC West with an 8-5 record, and as long as the Broncos didn't exactly lose their next 2 games and the Chargers won their next 3, then San Diego was... Oh. Right. So the NFL was definitely happy with this outcome because that would mean that everyone was going to be watching when the Chargers took on the Broncos in Week 17 to see who would make the playoffs. And as they tend to do from time to time, in this one game, the Chargers broke their own mold.
Here come the San Diego Chargers, put 52 up tonight and go on to make the playoffs.
They put up 52 points in the biggest game of the season, scoring more points in any game since the 1985 season for the Chargers, and clinched a playoff berth. And even with an 8-8 record because they won the division, they got to host a playoff game against the slightly favored Indianapolis Colts, who came back for revenge. Except for the Colts, this game didn't go well at all, because although they had the league MVP, the MVP of this game for both teams was the Chargers punter, Mike ciphers, who pinned Peyton Manning and the Colts' lethal offense inside their own 10 4 separate times, with his most devastating punt being his last that had Peyton Manning start his drive from the 1. Other than the punter just taking over, this game was a textbook back and forth, with the Colts struggling and the Chargers chargering, until, for seemingly the first goddamn time, Nate Kading decided to make a clutch field goal and sent the game to overtime. And in overtime, Darren Sproles, not LaDainian Tomlinson, called game and advanced the Chargers to the divisional round off of a last-second touchdown. And at this point, this year had already been considered a success, so when the Chargers fell to the eventual Super Bowl champion Steelers in the divisional round, nobody was upset, and even with Norv Turner's limitations, the future seemed beyond bright, with Rivers, Gates, Vincent Jackson, and a still solid defense leading the way. So going into the next year, even when always, the Chargers not only started out losing games they had no business ever even falling behind in, including a rough L to Josh McDaniels' Broncos, but things also got worse when they lost their previous All-Pro defensive tackle and run-stop staple Jamal Williams for the entire season in the first game, and any normal team at this point would have just been dead and buried after Week 5. But the Chargers in their weakest form got a little goofy and won 13 games. The 13. This team was good, but not that good, outside of one man who loves to because with LaDainian Tomlinson now past his prime due to injuries and age, Phillip Rivers, the reproduction machine, took the offense into his own hands and just went nuts, maximizing everything out of Gates, Vincent Jackson, Malcolm Floyd, and others, putting up MVP-worthy stats while leading the best passing offense in the league that year, and statistically speaking, the third best passing offense since 1993 to that point. Anyway, you know how it is. Chargers are the hottest team in the league going into the playoffs, again, this time fresh in the middle of a casual 11-game winning streak, and hosted a home divisional game against the New York Jets, led by Mark Sanchez. This Jets offense was hot sludge, but the defense was the best the league had to offer, led by Darrelle Revis and others. So when the game had 0 points in the first quarter, nobody was really shocked, other than when Nate Kading missed a chip shot 36-yard field goal, but it's fine. It's probably just nerves. It's fine. Everything will be fine. And after the Chargers finally broke through and scored a rare touchdown, they now held a one-possession lead. But even better, the defense held the Jets to nothing at all on the scoreboard, and they got an opportunity for a field goal at the end of the first half from 57 out and bricked it. But come on, that was a long one. You gotta give him that at least, and I'm sure if he gets another opportunity, he'll make the most of it. But man, if only the defense did its job, because of course holding a team to 0 touchdowns until the fourth quarter isn't nearly enough, because eventually the Jets broke through with 2 touchdowns, one being from 53 yards out, which forced Phillip Rivers to try and go down the field to bring the game to within a single possession. So after putting in a valiant effort and more and getting the Chargers into free field goal range, with 4 minutes and 42 seconds left on the clock in the fourth quarter, he came back in. Jets legend Nate Kading came back onto the field to redeem himself of his past sins.
7 Kading. This is it. And he is wide right. His third miss of the day.
He missed again. 0 for 3. This one being a near automatic make for any NFL kicker, especially a Pro Bowler in Kading. And with his miss, the ritual was complete. A game that started out on a sunny day with so much hope flowing through this 13-win team ended at the leg of their own man, as the Chargers fell to the New York Jets 17-14, with even one of those 3 missed field goals being enough to change everything. And now we move on to the 2010 Chargers season, arguably the most infamous in their entire franchise's history, where they famously finished the year leading the NFL in total yards gained on offense and allowed the least amount of yards on defense. And although those 2 stats definitely need more context, like field position, the defense had definitely improved from last year at least and was undoubtedly a top 10 unit led by Sean Phillips, Eric Weddle, and defensive coordinator Ron Rivera. And like I just said, the offense was pretty damn solid, with Phillip Rivers finding himself in the running for Offensive Player of the Year, even with a rotating cast of receivers and running backs. So you get the point. This team was very good. They had something that most Chargers teams in the past just straight up didn't have, and that was balance. They had a great offense and a great defense. And I mean, what more else is there even to football other than a guy who can throw the ball and a guy who can tackle, right? Right? Well, it turns out there's a little third part of football called special teams. And that would somehow tank the entire Chargers season.
Washington slowed down as he crossed the 20 and stays on his feet. Leon Washington is off to the races once again.
How did... This has literally never happened to any other team in the entire game's history, and likely never will happen again, where a team is debatably the best in the NFL on offense and defense, and failed to even make the playoffs. And to make things even more hilarious, their season was basically over after week 7, when they found themselves with a 2-5 record, and through week 5 in particular, the Chargers magically allowed 4 special teams touchdowns, which just, that ain't easy to accomplish at all. And even for a team that bathes in sadness, even dealing with a season like this was too much for the Chargers, and after that legendary 2010 disaster, from 2011 through 2016, the Chargers just kept following their cycle and found themselves in the dark ages once again, with Phillip Rivers watching as everyone around him crumbled and turned to nothing, with the Chargers locking back-to-back 4- and 5-win seasons in 2015 and 16, and after one of the most tragic deaths in NFL history occurred, with the heartbeat of the 90s Chargers team Junior Seau taking his own life as he suffered from CTE, now more than ever, the Chargers needed a drastic change, and unfortunately, that's exactly what they got. Ahead of the 2017 season, the Chargers' soul was already corrupted, but now it was ripped out of their bodies and smushed onto the floor by their greedy president Dean Spanos, with the Chargers announcing they were permanently moving on from their home of the last 54 years. Now, things got real messy here, because this move seemed years in the making, with Spanos constantly dodging the opportunity to pour money into the Chargers' San Diego stadium, and refused to pay for a new stadium in San Diego himself. So when the city also didn't want to just pay for the entire factory of sadness, that was that. The San Diego Chargers were no more, and from now on, the team would keep moving forward as the corpse of a lifeless corporate moneymaker being held up by the sticks of Dean Spanos' puppets, now being known as the Los Angeles Chargers. Got a little unnecessarily dark there, but anyways, after a relatively successful 9-7 campaign in 2017, in their first season under new head coach Anthony Lynn, the Chargers once again, guess what? Had a ton of talent, with the main new guys being relatively familiar new and older faces, with Phillip Rivers still leading the offense with new toys at his disposal in Pro Bowlers Melvin Gordon and Keenan Allen, and I guess Antonio Gates was still alive at this time, and the Chargers also fielded another top 10 defense led by all-pro rookie safety Derwin James, and other strong contributors in Melvin Ingram, Adrian Phillips, and Casey Hayward. So to begin the last true year with Phillip Rivers as the franchise quarterback, the more things change, the more they stay the same, with the Chargers losing 2 of their first 3 games, only to completely catch fire as the year went on. With the return of Joey Bosa from a foot injury in Week 11, the Chargers got progressively better and finished the year with a 12-4 record, their best record since 2009. But something just seemed off, and, well, it was pretty obvious. This team had no fans. The same fans that were treated like pawns by Spanos decided not to make the trip to LA and watch the Chargers play, which resulted in some of the funniest and most empty football games you'll see, and that was the best case scenario, because every other time, the stands were just loaded with the opposing team's color. So when the Chargers abruptly got matched up against Tom Brady and the still-kicking Patriots and got smoked, it seemed like nobody really cared anymore, and why would they? There were still some people that fell for the Chargers trap in 2019 and fully believed they would have a shot at the Super Bowl, only for them to fall on their face and turn in a 5-11 pitiful season. But because of their awful play, the Chargers once again cashed in on another franchise quarterback, drafting Oregon's Justin Herbert 6th overall in 2020. And although the jury's still out on the young Herbert a little bit, I think it's pretty obvious that he too has has succumbed to the corruption of the Chargers organization. Since Anthony Lynn was rightfully fired after the 2020 season and Brandon Staley was brought in, nothing's changed. This is still the same team from the 1965 season in just a different coat of paint. They found brand new impressive ways to lose games and ruin players, and it just keeps getting worse. And trust me, I could go game by game here, but not to have us here for another 2 hours. Just a few months ago, at the time of the recording of this video, I'm sure you're well aware, but the Chargers just came fresh off of blowing one of the biggest leads in playoff history to the heavy underdog Jacksonville Jaguars after holding a 27-0 lead. So yeah, this is just how the Chargers were and always will be, and whether the Chargers were cursed way back in that AFL championship game, or on Marlon McCree's fumble, or even in more recent years by Spanos himself, does it really matter? I mean, it's all kind of the same. No matter how good the Chargers are, no matter how talented they will be, it doesn't matter. And that's the tragic part, because seemingly no matter how loaded the Chargers may seem, their franchise has been one that has churned out nothing but misery and the stench of a truly cursed organization. Anyways, before we go, I'd like to shout out my Patreon. I started one, so if you want to throw me $1, because that's the only subscription I have remaining, because people have been saying that, well then there you go, I made one. It's in the description, so you can go do that if you want. But if you like this video, then watch this video right here where I broke down how the Kansas City Chiefs built a dynasty. It's pretty good, trust me. Anyways, until next time.